I'm open about myself because I want that kid, Googling trans people to see that they can exist. It means the world to me to be able to sit in this position and say that this is possible.
Schuyler Bailar has everything going for him. A star Division I NCAA swimmer, he ranked as one of the top breaststrokers in the US. And he was admitted to Harvard. But before starting university, Schuyler had an extremely difficult decision to make. Would he compete with the women's team or the men's? Schuyler struggled with an eating disorder and with his mental health. Swimming was his escape, but he realized accepting his true gender identity would be the best way to live life to the fullest in and out of the pool.
What's up, everybody? It's Schuyler. I'm a Korean-American swimmer from Harvard University, and I also happen to be transgender.
Today, Schuyler is a proud trans man. He continues to advocate for trans rights and educates his social media following with stories from his journey. Pride 2020? It's definitely going to be different this year. I'm chatting with Schuyler online to see how he's staying proud virtually. Schuyler, thank you so much for taking the time, and happy Pride Month.
Thank you. Happy Pride Month to you as well.
I love the setup that you got. You got the flag in the back. Let's actually go all the way back to your childhood and the start of your career. Age 15, one of the best breaststrokers in the nation. 17, you set a national age record, and then you end up going to Harvard. When you think back to that time and those accomplishments at that young age, what do you think?
Gosh, I think of a lot of things, but the number one thought that comes to my brain is the sound of being in a pool. Ever been in like a pool with a big swim meet? It's just super loud. You smell the chlorine. It's really hyped up. I think that's the biggest thing that I think of when I think of you said, 15 years old, breaststroke swimmer, national record, like that. That's what I thought of. Adjacent to that, almost immediately next is not the best of thoughts. It's kind of the remembrance of how depressed I was at the time. So, despite the fact that I was swimming really fast and getting all these accolades, at the time I was also pretty sad. So that also is a memory that comes up.
High school is a tough time at the best of times. You've got that pressure as a high-level swimmer, but then you were also going through some body image issues at the time. Walk me through what that felt like and how it manifested itself for you.
Sure. Yeah. Like you said, I think, high school is a difficult time for lots of different people for lots of different reasons. For me, it was the first time in my life I chose to start to fit in. And I had spent most of my childhood acting, presenting in the way that made me feel the most comfortable. But when I got to high school, I ended up being like, I want to be this person everybody else says that I am. And in order to do that, I felt like I had to conform to a different image of who I was supposed to be. So I'm transgender. I was assigned female at birth. So despite the fact that I acted, quote unquote, like a boy, I dressed stereotypically like a boy, people bullied me constantly for looking and acting differently. And so when I got to high school, I thought, maybe I should fit in to this like picture of womanhood that everybody else wants me to be. And thus ensued all these body image issues.
Was there a time or a moment or occurrence where you realized some of those struggles were related to, not just the body image issues, but struggles with your gender identity?
No, which is weird. I wish that I had a moment where I was like, gosh, this is the issue, right? But at the time, I think I was so, I don't know what the right word is. I was so honestly busy with swimming and with school. I was a straight A student. I was swimming 20 to 24 hours a week, and there was no time for anything else. So I don't really think I ever took a pause to think, why am I miserable? Why is this happening to me? Why do I feel so disconnected from my body? And instead, I just focused on succeeding. I didn't connect it to gender identity until I stopped swimming, until I was not at school anymore.
Succeeding in sports, you have some support, teammates and family and coaches. Did you have any support in terms of the struggles you were going through? Did anyone really know?
I think for a lot of it, people didn't, mostly because I didn't know how to verbalize what I was going through because I wasn't even really sure. So when I did start needing help, it was because the eating disorder that I was suffering from became so extreme that I needed to seek help from that. And I did. I was very conscious. This is an eating disorder. This isn't right. I need help with this. So I reached out for help for the eating disorder, and that's what I got help for 2 years of therapy in high school. But that wasn't the root of the problem, and it wasn't until I actually went to a residential treatment center for that eating disorder that I was able to unpack what actually was underneath all of those things.
So is that the moment for you, or the time frame where it clicked, where you realized you were transgender?
Yeah, so when I was in this treatment center, I was surrounded by women. We were all struggling with eating disorders, and I was like, something about this is different from them for me. And there was like a specific moment where I thought, oh my gosh, am I transgender? I was sitting in the car. We were going from the center to the apartments we lived in. I was wearing what I called my man jeans at the time. They were the one pair of jeans that were from the men's section. And I was feeling really uncomfortable with how they fit me. And I thought to myself, am I uncomfortable because of how they fit me because I think I'm fat? Like, is it a body image distortion? Or am I uncomfortable because they don't fit the way I feel like I should because of my gender? And that was the moment where I had this huge like internal meltdown of like, oh my God, I think I'm trans. Yeah.
Deciding to start to transition is an incredibly personal and difficult decision all the time. But you had baked into it some nuance with another decision, and that is going after your dream of being an NCAA champion, competing against females, or competing with males, and all of the challenges that would come with it. What was that process like, trying to work through all of that?
At first, I didn't even know competing as male was an option. I thought the choices were compete as a woman or quit swimming. So at first, I was absolutely terrified that being trans and opening up about being trans would lose me my sport. I decided to take the risk to tell my coaches. They were incredibly supportive, and I'm so grateful for that. And they said, let's figure it out. Fast forward 6 months, then I was offered a spot on the men's team by the men's coach at Harvard. And he said, you can swim my team. Let's figure this out. That choice was probably one of the most excruciating decisions I've ever made in my entire life. I had spent my whole life trying to be good at swimming, right? Like, I had started swimming before I was 1 year old. I'd competed by the time I was 6. I was swimming twice a day at 4 a.m. before school and then after school by the time I was 12. Nationally ranked, like you said, by the time I was 15, and then national record when I was 17. My whole life had been built around swimming and being good at swimming. And then if I swam as a man, in a second, that would shatter all of those potential successes I could have had as a woman. And so it took me a long time to let go of that, to say, hey, I actually need to value myself and my own happiness, which I don't think I've actually cultivated through this sport. I mean, I love this sport, but I've already gotten all these successes, and look where I am in a treatment facility because I'm so miserable, right? So there was a moment when I realized, I had a conversation with my dad actually, that he said to me, are you actually going to value the success you have, as a woman? Or does it mean nothing to you because it's not truly who you are? And in that moment, I thought, wow, yeah, it clearly doesn't mean that, anything to my happiness, because here I am miserable with all the success I've already had.
So was that process somewhat clean? Can you just move on and divorce yourself from those hopes and dreams, competing cold turkey, or were there's some constant struggle after the fact?
Sure. I would say that there was struggle. I call it grief, and I think that there was a lot of grieving to be done about, the way I think about it is there's 2 doors, and I chose to go through one, and there's a lot of happiness on the other side of that door. There's a lot of success. There's a lot of different kinds of success. Lots of feeling like myself, beautiful things, but not walking through the other door is still sad. And I still have to grieve the fact that I didn't get what was on the other side of that door. Again, it doesn't mean that I'm not thrilled by the decision that I made, by the things that I have garnered and cultivated through going through the door that I did, but there's still been grieving about not going through that other door. And I think the most sort of specific story moment that I can give you about that, we were at the first travel meet at Columbia in New York City, and the men watched the women swim first. The women 100 breaststroke went, which is my best event, and the Harvard women lost by 3 seconds. The person who won went or maybe it was like 1 or 2 seconds. It wasn't a huge margin, but it was a good margin. Our team lost, and the person who won went like a 10, I think it was like a 106 or maybe 105 on a breast. And my teammates are sitting around with me, and they're like, "Hey, Sky, isn't your best time like 3 seconds faster than that?" Because they understand that I would have been there, right? And I was like, "Guys, don't tell me that. Like, let's not think about it." I swam an hour later in my own 100 breaststroke on the men's side, and I went 101. I would have beat them by 4.5 seconds, and I got 15th place on the men's side. And at this point I had just started testosterone therapy, so there was no like testosterone advantage. Like that would have probably been my time, right, on the women's side. And so there was a huge feeling for me where I was like, oh my God, like this is so frustrating, right? Like that glory I could have had on the women's side. So again, 2 doors, really happy to go through one, still grieve the fact that I didn't go through the other.
Was there a moment or an anecdote that made you feel really welcome to be joining the men's team?
The first time I hung out with the whole team, I actually ended up asking, I don't know where I got the boldness to do this, but I ended up asking almost every single team member, "Hey, will you accept me on this team as a trans guy? What do you think about this?" And almost every single guy said something along the lines of, "Well, are you going to keep up in practice?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, that's the goal." "Are you going to get good grades in school? Because our GPA is super important to us." And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And they're like, "Yeah, great. Then I don't see why not." There was this openness to, if you're going to, try hard in the pool and try hard in school, then why not?
Been on a bunch of sports teams, and the overall team GPA was never a conversation. It's clear you went to Harvard, and I didn't. Part of your personal transition included surgeries. Can you talk us through that process and what it was like for you?
Yeah, so the first thing I like to say about transition is that there's no really one way to transition. So I always stray away from the terminology of like the transition or the complete, the whole, the full transition, because this denotes 2 things. 1, that there is such thing as a prescribed whole transition, right? And 2, that you then know what that is for somebody else. Transition can include lots of different things. It can include surgeries, hormone therapy, haircuts, name changes, pronoun changes, but it can also not include any of those things. And we really want to make sure that we let the person who's talking about their transition describe that for themselves or define it for themselves. For me, my transition included hormone therapy. It included a mastectomy, which is called top surgery, a masculinization of chest, removal of breast tissue, and a haircut. I didn't change my name. So my transition has been, I think for me, it has been fairly easy, and that, I mean, logistically speaking, I had a lot of support from my parents, and so I'm very privileged to say that and to have that, and that allowed me kind of mobility within what happened during my transition, medically speaking. It should not be a privilege to have parents that support me. I think that should be expected. Unfortunately, it is in this world. But yeah, I think the biggest thing that people get stuck on for sports is hormone therapy. So for me, I take testosterone, and that is sanctioned by the NCAA. I just have to prove that my levels are at an average male level, and so I submit labs throughout the season to prove that.
You are the first openly trans athlete in NCAA Division I. When you think about you being historical, what's that like?
Gosh, I'm open about myself because I want that kid, who's sitting in their apartment by themselves, Googling trans people to see that they can exist, right? When I was a kid, I Googled constantly queer athletes, trans athletes, whatever, didn't find anybody. And so I concluded that it wasn't possible to be myself and also do my sport. And so when I think about that line, first trans athlete on a D1 men's team in the NCAA, I think about that kid being able to Google and find somebody that exists. And it means the world to me to be able to sit in this position and say that this is possible. And not only is it possible, but it's happiness filled, right? There's pleasure in this. There is success. There's glory, and it might not be the glory that I originally planned for, but there is certainly glory here. And there's some of the glory that I originally planned for. I won a couple races here and there and some small meets, and that was really cool, right? So I think, to me, it means the world to be able to share this. But when I share this, it is not like my success and my proof. It is proof for everybody. It is success for everybody, and especially for other queer and trans athletes out there to say, hey, this is possible for you.
Do you now consider yourself a role model?
That's such a difficult question, because I think the answer is yes. I do consider myself a role model, but not in the way that means. Here's how I'll answer this question. So a lot of people will text me and say, or DM me or email me and say, I want to be just like you when I grow up. And my answer is always, I don't want you to be just like me. I want you to be just like you. I want you to be you. And I think that's crucial. And I've always strayed away in my whole life, even before any of this. As a kid, I always rejected the idea of a role model because it meant I was supposed to be like somebody else. And I don't want anybody to have to be like somebody else. The whole point of my proof of myself is that I am myself. And so if being like me means being like you, then absolutely I'm a role model. But if being like me means you trying to be me, then I don't want that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my primary thing is I want people to be themselves.
You've been through so much. Eating disorder, transition, understanding your gender identity. If you could go back to that young kid just trying to figure it out and fit in, what would you tell them?
I would tell him that I think he knows exactly what's going on. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of kids make as they grow up, and this is a societal mistake more so, is they learn who they're supposed to be instead of who they are. And I spent a lot of high school learning who other people wanted me to be and who I was supposed to have been, and forgetting who I knew I was. And when I think about my 8-year-old self, that's kind of the key self I go back to. He knew exactly who he was. He knew exactly what he wanted the world, and he let other people's opinions pull him away from that. So if I could go back, I'd sit him down and be like, hey, you got this. You know what you need. You know what you want. And don't let anybody tell you different.
Pride in 2020 is going to be different. It's going to be very different. It's going to be virtual with not the same number of in-person events. What's Pride this year going to look like for you in 2020?
Pride right now is all about fighting for Black liberation alongside queer liberation. And I think that that is the primary point that I'm sitting on right now. I think it's part of the national movement, but I also think it's so important that BLM, Black Lives Matter, isn't a trend, right? That we continue forwards with this. And to me, it's so integral to fight together alongside my Black queer friends, my Black trans friends, my Black friends, period, right? That to me is actually what Pride's about. And I think it actually harkens back again to 1969 when Pride wasn't about marching through the streets in celebration. It was marching for rights. It was marching for lives. It was marching for liberation. And I think we forget that part of Pride often. I love the celebratory nature of it. I think it's huge to celebrate the wins that we do have. But Pride is also a recognition of where we come from. It is also a tribute to those who fought and died for our lives and our rights. And I don't want to forget that part. I don't mean that in a dark way. I mean that in a defiant, determined way.
I appreciate that. As someone who's trying to be as best I can an ally to you, I appreciate you're trying to be an ally for me, and that my life matters. The other thing I really appreciate is on your social media, your whiteboard sayings. You always have one. They're always poignant. Can you give us maybe a little sneak peek, a little scoop on a whiteboard photo you're going to have on the gram in the future?
Well, I currently am working on a post for terminology, so just a kind of a couple tips and tricks for referring to trans folks that I think can be helpful, especially as we're kicking up a conversation more so about trans people, and especially in spaces that people aren't used to it. So for example, there was a march of over 15,000 people in New York City for Black Trans Lives, which is huge. I mean, that like made me cry just like looking at that, the amount of people who came out for trans folks, especially Black trans folks. But there's also, because not a lot of people are aware of language, that's definitely something that I want to make sure that I say, hey, here's some like language tips, right? I'm trying to think of some other ones coming up. We got some other pride-based ones. I have one that another thing I like to do is share kind of little historical tidbits that I think are relevant to movements that we're going through that people don't remember. So I just posted one about like the history of policing in the US, and I'm by no means an expert on that, but I was kind of resharing other things that I'd read. So yeah, that would be, I guess, a sneak peek. Is a couple more historical bits, all tied into, again, like Black liberation alongside queer liberation.
Well, language matters for sure. We know that, and our history matters. So thank you for illuminating us on both. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you. I appreciated this chat with you.
Awesome. Happy Pride.